Welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton.
And I'm Alan Chappell. And this podcast goes deep into the collision of big tech
and the future of the world.
We explore how companies like Google, Meta, and Apple are impacting each of our lives.
I'm an investigative journalist.
I'm a privacy lawyer.
And every week we speak with experts to bring the unreported details into the light.
Cloudflare jolted the tech and publishing world a few months ago when it announced that it was stepping in as a traffic cop for the open web. The company's massive. It already handles 1 in 5 web requests globally, and that's 4.7 trillion requests per day. It's kind of the invisible shield that many of the world's biggest publishers, including Reuters and The Guardian and others, rely on to keep hackers and cyber threats at bay. But Cloudflare made a decision recently to raise the stakes. It said it would start blocking AI crawlers. These are the bots that hoover up the journalism and the creative work of the open web without permission. And instead, Cloudflare was going to make them pay. The tool it unveiled was built on a dusty, rarely used web protocol called HTTP 402 payment required. What it means in practice is pay per crawl. It tells AIs that they have to pay for using publisher content, or they won't be allowed to see it. Now, if it works, publishers are finally going to get something they've been demanding for years: money for when their work is used to train AI or turns up in AI searches. And since Cloudflare made that announcement in July, 3 things have already happened. Publishers have lined up behind the idea. Cloudflare has made crawler blocking the default, sending a message to AI that you can't train unless the publisher says yes. And it's also named and shamed AIs that have tried to dodge the block, most notably Perplexity, when it disguised its bots to avoid playing. Now, fans of this newsletter and podcast will know that a large working group of publishers and I did some early scoping around a product like this called AirGap 18 months ago. So we know already how powerful it can be. The question that we all have is Cloudflare the company that can actually deliver it? So today, Alan and I are joined by Will Allen, Cloudflare's VP of Product, to unpack whether this is really the turning point that we've all been hoping for, given that so far it's been a very long and losing battle for content creators. Will, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Now, you may or may not know, but earlier this week, I asked my readers for questions for you, and I've never seen a response like it. There were publishers coming in from everywhere with questions, and we're going to ask a lot of those today. But before we do, I want to start with one of my own. So the question is, why are you doing this, right? Because you're willing to face the wrath of the AI companies. You've literally put a hurdle between them and their next $1 trillion, right? This could turn bloody. Why are you doing it?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. We are doing it for a couple of reasons. One is I actually think there's an incredible equilibrium to have here that makes sort of the forward thinking and the great sort of AI companies that care about content, that makes them successful and supports rights holders and content creators and news publishers and local news and content creators on the other side. I think there's a equilibrium here that actually can help both parties be quite happy with the outcome. And what we've seen, so far is that it felt like an unlevel playing field, a little tilted in the wrong direction. And so one of the core reasons that we're doing this is we feel like we can help fix it. We can help sort of readdress those things. So if you're creating content, you feel like you're in control. And if you're an AI company and you're looking for amazing, local, relevant content, you have an easy way to get that and to get access for it. So that's number one. I think there is a good equilibrium there that we could work towards. The second reason is probably even bigger than that is we believe in the open web. There is so much of what we do at Cloudflare is what we've thought about for, we just had our 15th anniversary here, is we think about sort of the open web. And there is a real risk here that the web continues to get closed and increasingly closed and move behind more paywalls, more gates, more, terms of service. And those are great if you want to have those, but we would like to have a way for content creators to be able to have their content out on the open web, accessible to everyone, and not have sort of their content be used for commercial purposes by others if they don't want it to be. So there's this really interesting moment in time where we are about helping to preserve the open web. And that's driving a lot of what we're thinking of.
everyone in the world's going to love that, except the tech companies and the AI companies. Which kind of brings me to my next question, which actually comes in from one of the readers. So this is from Aisha Gaventure in Dublin. And this was what she said: let's be real. Bad actors that want to bank all that money are just going to try and ignore everything you're doing. They're just going to ignore your protocols and your barriers. So how are you going to stop them? Because an honesty box system or a partnership system for 25 years has not worked for a single minute. So why do we think something's going to work this time?
I do think there are really good actors that are above board and trying to do the right thing with AI companies. And we work with many of them, and I use many of their products. And, I think they're doing the right thing by identifying their crawlers, allowing you to opt out via robots.txt, having separate crawlers for different purposes. Those are things that we think are really critical and important. And so I do want to applaud those folks who have done it kind of right from the beginning. They don't always get everything right, of course. None of us do. But I do see real concerted efforts to sort of try to do the right thing. That, though, is paired with the reality of what you just said, which is there are bad actors out there. And, the internet has been filled with bad actors for since its origins. And that's not, that's remains true today. And so there are certainly data brokers out there, mass data scrapers, some companies looking for sort of pre-training data that are out there ignoring every possible directive, trying to evade every possible block, trying to ingest the entire internet to train their next model. That is categorically happening as well, right? And so a lot of our focus is how do we build that sort of happy path, that virtuous path for those who are trying to do the right thing, make it easy for them to access the content if the content creator wants them to. And then how do we empower a publisher or a news organization to take action and sort of decisive action when they do not want their content to be ingested by these data scrapers? And that is a cat and mouse game, but it's one where I feel pretty confident in what we're able to do.
And that's sort of what I was thinking. And maybe this is just my legal brain, but we've got a system currently that is rather opaque. It's based on like a handshake deal that was started 20, maybe 25 years ago. And so now people are kind of implicitly changing the deal and pretending that it's the same deal. And so isn't part of the strategy here is to put some of those bad actors on notice so that publishers who choose to pursue litigation, for example, will at least be able to say, yes, we have provided some level of notice to this bad actor. Because without that, you kind of open yourself up to a whole bunch of shenanigans in court.
What we've said is that the internet, and as we all know, and it sort of have come up with it, is had this unspoken agreement, which is I put my content on the open web and I get some level of attribution back for it. So people know that it was that I created it. Ideally, I also get some sort of referral traffic back to me that sort of I can monetize directly or indirectly. But at a minimum, the world knew it was me who created the thing. And many of our sort of foundational, software licenses and sort of licenses of how we think about work have that sort of attribution of like, you created this thing at their forefront. Think of MIT, think of Creative Commons. Those are really based upon the principle of saying like, yes, this person created that. And maybe there's no monetary value changing hands, but sort of that attribution back. That world has changed, right? And so now we as consumers, we are going to our favorite answer engine, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever the latest thing is. And we are staying there, right? Inside that context. And we're not always going back to the source. And we don't always sort of read the sources because they're in, small fine print. Now that can be really great as a consumer experience, extremely challenging for the content creator if they didn't want that to happen. So the rules have changed, the game has changed. And what we tell publishers and content creators is you should be back in charge. And we're going to give you the tools to first and foremost audit, sort of understand what's going on, look at the data of what's happening with your content. You then go off and define your policies, however they fit. Some want to write for the super intelligence. Some want to write for human eyes only. You should be the one to decide that. And then we help you enforce those policies, right? If you say, I want to block all the bots and block all the crawlers, great. We make it simple. If you want to say, I want to block some and not others, great. We also help you do that.
Amazing. Okay. So I think everybody is completely on board with that. Okay. On the publisher side, I've always viewed the web as a kind of supply and demand ecosystem. It's incredibly complicated, but at its heart, it's incredibly simple. People create content that people want to consume. The internet is the process by which we do that, right? But as you say, the marketplace has changed. The marketplace is making money out of being the intermediary rather than the creator or the consumer, all right? I always laugh. I used to be a paper boy when I first started out in newspapers, and I earned hardly anything, and the editor earned a lot. And these days, Paperboy gets $1 billion and the editor gets nothing. We've changed the delivery mechanism into the trillionaire, and that feels upside down because I'm not sure that's a sustainable marketplace. Which kind of brings me to my next question. So in layman's terms, because I'm sure you're an absolute debt-set genius, right? So I'm going to need you to try and break this down into something people can explain or understand. How can you tell the difference between a good bot and a bad bot and a real person? Can you try and explain that? So how is your policeman at the border going to figure this out?
Yeah, I think in some ways the good versus bad is actually in the eyes of the beholder, right? And it's important that when you use Cloudflare, sort of use one of our services, and you put your website and secure it with us, or your API, your MCP server, you are the decider. You get to decide what to do. And you might say, great, send me all bot traffic because for whatever reason, you like those bots. Great, that's up to you. You're probably not going to like a big DDoS attack. And so that might be sort of categorically a bad bot. But for the most part, you could sort of fully get to decide what it is. And a lot of that's based upon the behavior of what they're doing. They're just coming once, so they're resource intensive, and what are they giving you back? So a lot of the anchoring is identification. Can we tell who this request is coming from? Either it's a sort of self-declared crawler, it's a Google bot, a Bing bot, a GPT bot, and we have a lot of ways we can identify them thanks to IP addresses and DNS lookup and cryptographic verification. And so that's one sort of category, which is like, they are saying like, hey, this is me. And that's really important. And then you can decide to allow them in or not. But then you get into just sort of like normal internet human traffic and sort of bot traffic, which is just you're seeing a request coming through. And that request is either from, me, I'm hands on a keyboard typing into a browser, I'm on my phone looking into a browser, or it's some automated action. And so we do a lot of work, a lot of ML, actually sort of early AI, a lot of AI work on actually analyzing that type of traffic. So you as the site owner can decide, oh, wait, this traffic looks automated. And do I want automated traffic or do I want to block it? And do I want to sort of really steer my traffic towards being more human centric or more bot centric? There are a lot of bots that every publisher, every content creator uses and they tend to love, right? So maybe it's part of their advertising stack. Maybe it's part of their looking for accessibility stuff. Those are great, incredibly important things. And you want to allow that traffic through. You don't want to get DDoSed. You don't want to have just a data scraper pulling your data. So a lot of it's sort of like the tools that we give you to help sort of the identification side and then see what they're actually doing. And then you get to take the action based upon what they're doing inside your network.
Thank you for that. So I work with a lot of publishers. So does Alan. We've sat down and had quite a few conversations with some very important CEOs and some very swanky clubs, haven't we, Alan, over the years, trying to figure our way through this. Not all publishers are the same. Okay. So, if you're a giant publisher with incredibly valuable content, you have a view on what the value of that is. And if you're a hyper local paper or, you're a local publisher, you're much, much smaller, you kind of look at this stuff and just feel that you're going to get drowned in the tsunami. Okay. So I believe that in your pay per crawl model, you allow publishers to choose their pricing for what that might be. So it's going to be different for everybody. Can you explain to me what the actual logistics of that are? And how do you ensure that local, smaller publishers that are still really important, still get to have a say or have a way to play in this mix?
I mean, that local news ecosystem is incredibly important. It's important for so many reasons, philosophical, for sort of like the political reasons, just to like the feeling of community. And, my small town where I live, like having sort of that local news is just an incredibly important part of my day-to-day life. And so it's something we believe in a lot, and I personally believe in a lot and want to sort of incentivize. Our pay-per-crawl product, it's still in an early beta. We're testing this because we're moving into an entirely different, way that we consume and interact with content. And there will be lots of models that sort of are tried, and we are experimenting with many, and which one is going to win and be the predominant one, we don't know yet, right? I come at this part with a pretty high degree of humility, and that I want to do a lot of experimentation that sort of holds to our core principles, listen to our customers and build and try to find that right model. And so pay-per-crawl is one early experiment there. A core philosophy we had was that, and still have, is that the publisher should get to decide the value of their content. And, that doesn't always mean that the market will meet. It doesn't always mean that the buy side will say, yes, I'm willing to pay that. But that process where they actually get to start and say, hey, this is what I think it's worth for whatever that is, we think it should start with them. And so they can sort of set that price. There's a lot of work that needs to happen, both in what we're building and other marketplaces that are out there that allows more dynamic price discovery. Think of stock markets or prediction markets. These are ones where you have bid-ask spread and you start to get really, actionable information about the type of information you have out there. Ad exchanges are incredibly, sophisticated, pricing mechanisms that are out there. And so I imagine we'll move towards that in some sort of model. But at the outset, it was really about sort of anchoring with this sort of core principle of control in the hands of the content creator and giving them sort of the ability to sort of say, hey, here's our content. If you want to access it for inference or for search, here's what it costs.
I just want to add that every single publisher listening to this heard the word exchange and literally just fell over onto their head.
I was just going to say, it would be a nice place where the person that creates the product actually chooses the price of it. We seem to have got shopping backwards recently. It's kind of like, I'm the customer. I don't really feel like paying for that. So I'm just going to take the bread and the cheese, but I'll give you 15 cents for that ham, right? That's the way it really feels if you're on the publisher side of this equation. And I think, quite a lot of people are deciding just to give up at this point, just don't want to play in this space anymore. So if we want to have a thriving open web, as you say, and if we do want to have premium content being created by key people that care about it, for people that care about consuming it, there has to be a change. So I applaud your efforts. Alan, sorry.
Is this on some level an admission that the regulatory environment as it currently exists is just not going to be in place to really protect content creators?
There's a lot of important work that's happening, and my colleague Alyssa in particular sort of drives that for us here, and she's one of the smartest people I've ever met. So I feel like a high degree of confidence in her to sort of both explain to me in layman's terms what's actually happening. It's complex, it's global, a lot of different issues that are out there. So there is movement in various jurisdictions, and there's nearly an infinite number of them. I tend to be very focused on, in some ways, the practical of like, what can we do today, right? So what are the tools that I can build for customers that give them the control that they want, and to help build this better internet that's out there. And so that's where a lot of my focus is. It's like really on like the day-to-day, the product, the engineering. What can we do that's actually actionable, empower the content creators, and at the same time, think about what do the AI companies of the future and the ones today, what do they need? And how do we sort of like help these two parties that which might feel too distant, come together in a more sort of cohesive environment?
So ultimately, in some level, there's a void here, and we can blame it on the regulatory system. We can blame it on a vague and opaque set of rules that initially governed the use of bots. But there's a void here, and you guys are effectively trying to set up a market to meet that void.
We are. And a lot of it is just, again, like building the tools that allow people to sort of take control of their apps and their services. And that, again, it's really that guiding principle for us is that when you put your website, whatever that is, whether it's willsguitars.com or a large enterprise or a local news organization, you shouldn't have to worry about it getting DDoSed. We help you there. If you don't want it to be scraped by a bunch of data scrapers, we can help you there. If you want to have it, generated into a markdown version and every agent gets access to it instantly, so it could be in the pre-training and in the inference, we can help you there, right? The idea, again, is that you should be in the driver's seat. And that's where a lot of our focus is on, is sort of getting you in there and not waiting for that to happen, doing that today.
Fair. Ricky, do you want to jump to some of the questions from readers?
Yeah, you go. Why don't you ask Chris's question?
Okay. This comes from our mutual friend, Chris Brinkworth. And so he says, this makes you rather powerful, which I think kind of builds on my previous question, where you were controlling the traffic and who gets in and who gets paid. So publishers have not had the best experience with big tech companies, which might be the understatement of the year. Can you promise that Cloudflare will be different?
The decision really is in their hands, and sort of the hands of the publisher and the content creator. And so really, we build these tools and services to empower them to make the decisions. We're not making them on their behalf. We make it easy to implement. So an example, if you don't have a robots.txt file, we make it one click so you can have a robots.txt file. If you're worried about sort of bots, we give you like a one-click option to, do this what we call bot fight mode to sort of do those. So it's really not about us having the power. It's about empowering our customers to give them those tools that are out there. And, I think that's ultimately by listening to your users and building great products for the customers, it's good for the business, but they're the ones in control. That is our core philosophy here.
No, and fair enough, because there's, for every News Corp or Daily Mail, I mean, wonderful, wonderful companies, there are literally tens of thousands of small to mid-sized publishers who are really trying to figure this out and don't have the benefit of an army of lawyers to help negotiate a lot of these types of deals. And so I'm optimistic that this is something that can serve them. And so kudos. That wasn't so much a question, I guess, a gush, but we'll let it run with it.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, you've got a whole bunch of really cool tools. What's your thinking about, some of them are going to be value adds to your existing service, some of which you're going to charge for in some pro forma way, and others, I would imagine, if you set up a marketplace, you would take a vig on what's going through that marketplace. Have you guys thought through how that would work?
One of our core philosophies, and this is true from sort of the founding of Cloudflare, is we have an incredibly robust free offering. And so, I mean, I personally have, I think, 6 or 7, domains. None of them are big, but my monthly bill, even before I joined Cloudflare, was $0 for each of these. That's an incredibly important part of what we do, is to be able to sort of offer a lot of our sort of services for free to people. And so that is one of the reasons I think we've been able to be successful, because you learn from those customers, those free customers, on the weekends, and become the enterprise buyer sort of the next week, which is really an important part of this. So free is really critical for us. Anyone can get access to our tool called AI Crawl Control for free. And so every website that sort of sits behind us and gets protected gets access to that. You can one-click block all training bots for free. You can have us manage your robots.txt file for free. So that's an important part of what we're doing. And then on the other side of the marketplace side, it's really early. Again, we think there's going to be a lot of experimentation happening. We're running our own experiment, and we're, have yet to be announced other experiments that are out there. We think there are going to be interesting models that are out there.
This is from Joshua Lowcock, who is a friend of our pod, but was also one of the witnesses in the Google Ad Tech antitrust trial and former global chief media officer at Universal McCann. So his question is, it's great that you are helping publishers fight AI scrapers, but at the same time, a lot of AI slop sites and phishing scams also hide behind Cloudflare. With AI making that problem worse, why not do more to stop junk content pouring onto the web? His fear is that if you don't, the real publishers are just going to get drowned out and lose money anyway.
There's a real concern, and not related to Cloudflare, but about slop on the internet. And I feel like in the past couple of days, that's certainly been, a bigger topic that's out there. There's differences of opinions and sort of across the board about sort of what's interesting. If you pull up a photo and you do some sort of interesting sort of remove background, does that become fully AI generated? I think there are interesting philosophical debates to be had around that. I think to get to the crux of his question, we've got a really robust trust and safety team and department there that sort of works very diligently to make sure, the IP rights are respected very broadly. But also we want to, when we think about the marketplaces, we're very careful on our side to make sure that it's high quality content and built in a way that sort of has a positive sum across the board. I do think it's still early to sort of see, a lot of my personal focus has been on sort of building tools to empower content creators, across the Cloudflare network. Not all of that content is, content that I'm particularly interested in, the local news organizations and places that I haven't yet visited. And so I don't have a vested interest in those, but really about giving them the tools that they need that's out there. The rough answer to the question is really robust trust and safety department, sort of thinking about those things, but also we are absolutely rapidly entering a world of every piece of content that's generated has some part of AI infused into the creation part of it, whether you're just using, the latest spell check, or you're translating it, or if you're creating a video and you're editing it in your favorite sort of video, tool. AI tools are sort of ubiquitous throughout there. So it's an interesting, new world that we're entering.
I think Joshua's question is, and we know Joshua well, he's an incredibly powerful global media executive, but his dad runs a newsagent. So, local news is infused in his soul. And, what he's worried about is that, and I am too as a journalist, is that, we spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of expertise and a lot of wisdom in creating premium content. But if there's only one of us and there are 50 million bot versions of us created out of Belarus writing things that are nonsense, how do we manage to make sure that our information gets seen?
It's an incredibly valid concern of how do you have high quality content to continue to sort of rise, and how do you build new signals for high quality content that's out there? A lot of sort of the core indexing algorithms of Google have worked really well for a long time. Do those withstand the test of the onslaught of mass generated sort of text when it's the cost for creation of text that's, semi-nonsensical goes to effectively zero. That's a challenge, right? That is an internet, humanity challenge that we have. I tend to be an optimist on that side, that either through personalities or new discovery engines, we're able to sort of have that high quality content rise to the top. But I equally hear, and it's a very valid concern on the other side.
You have not been on LinkedIn recently, I take it.
I mean, there's a lot. Maybe I'm just getting good at tuning out certain things that are out there. At least my close friends on LinkedIn are still posting, real things, not as many M dashes that are out there.
Oh, everybody hates the M dash, and that's like part of my thing.
I was a long-time advocate, and sad to see it having the imprint of AI generated content.
Maybe Elon Musk's going to call his next child M dash. That could happen. I could see that. So, Will, my last question. Journalists, we're professional cynics, okay? And so our job is always to think about, to dream of the upside, but to prepare for the downside and to ask the tough questions. And I've got nothing but praise for you for giving this a go. And I'm very happy and thank you and all power to you. And I think we would all like to line up behind you to help do some good work to achieve the outcomes that you've explained. So I want that to be clear. But there are worries that you have as a business, you have access to all of this publisher content. And one day you might decide to build your own LLM because you've got access to this, because you can see everything. Or it may give you an unfair advantage to be able to do something that in the future your shareholders push you to do. Or you might decide to launch an ad network because suddenly you can see $1 trillion and everybody's on your case for this. And this may be impossible to ask, but my question is how can we as an industry feel confident that you're going to stay our friend? And I'm going to add a little bit of color to this. I was in the room at News Corp when we did the first ever deal with the Google founders in the late 90s. And they said, if you give us your content, we'll give you traffic. And we were like, terrific, let's do that deal. That sounds like a great idea. What we should have done is we should have done pay per crawl, but we didn't because we were in the advertising business. We never expected them to be in the advertising business. So someone's friend today can very quickly, if they have access to all of it, all the data, flip somewhere else. I'm asking you a really tough question. How do we trust you not to do that?
In a prior life, I helped sort of work on this thing. It was called provenance standards when I was at Adobe. And sort of the whole concept there is how do you have cryptographic verification of content, right? And so when you take a photo, how do you actually know this photo came from, a Nikon camera or a Leica camera or something? And my mantra for years was, don't just trust, verify. And I think, obviously I didn't come up with it, but sort of one that I just constantly thought there of like, you needed that for, the AI generated content that's out there. The same thing's true here. Like, look at our actions, listen to, not only sort of what we're saying and sort of, but actually watch what we're doing that's out there. There's real, genuine dedication to building this. I joined Cloudflare for this reason. When I sort of started to hear Matthew and Dane and Stephanie talk about this more publicly, I knew it was something I wanted to sort of help build and help work towards. And I feel like we've gotten a pretty good track record so far, but, also verify, keep us honest of what's going on and sort of how we're doing and what we can do better. And we really, truly listen to our customers and to what the feedback that's going on. We take it very seriously. Everyone says that. We actually walk that walk, which I think is important. The other thing I would say is that our CEO, Matthew, was on a podcast with an incredible venture capital firm in New York City called USV, just last week or the past couple of weeks. And they were sort of reminiscing about sort of the early days of Cloudflare. And Matthew sort of recounts the story, which I will sort of butcher and not do as well as he does, obviously, but about this realization that he had at that time that it's not our data, it's our customers' data, right? And those are our customers. And so, I think probably the biggest thing I would say is that stuck with Matthew since the founding. And there's a great podcast, we can sort of link to it, where he talks about that. But it's true today. We think of that we are empowering our customers and we're here to serve them. And that is just a core philosophy that's been true from the very beginning. And I think will remain true.
And in fairness, you guys aren't exactly like the new company on the block. I mean, you have been around a while and there is a history that people can point to.
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, like we really do try to walk that walk. And, maybe we were a little late in sort of really fully understanding the implications for the publishing world, but, better late than never. And so, since I think it sort of really started to click for us about a year and a half ago, like, whoa, this is changing consumer behavior at a mass scale on the internet, which has real downside implications if we don't sort of help build new models. We've been really sort of laser focused on how do we help mitigate those.
We would love to help you understand the nuances of that collectively. Thank you so much for joining us, Will. That's been really helpful. I'm sure we're going to check in again as this progresses, but know that the industry is a cautious yes behind you. We want to see this happen, and we really appreciate you taking the initiative.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Really fantastic conversation. So appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Will. Thanks for coming on. And if Ricky and I move forward with our plan to start having musical guests, maybe that gives us another opportunity to have you come on. What do you think?
Would love to.
Fantastic.
I would sorely disappoint your readers and listeners, but I would love to be here.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.